Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life Health Show.
Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. My name is Paul and I've been eating a raw vegan diet now for 29 years. And today I'm going to comment on this video, Raw Vegan Doctor's Shocking Revelation on Cooked Food. And it's by my friend John Kohler, who has this channel called OK Raw. OK Raw. It's a very successful raw food channel. You see they have 163,000 subscribers. And more importantly, John, who's the fellow with the hat there, he's been eating a raw food diet around just as long as I have, or he was eating a raw food diet as long as I have. And I'm going to comment in this video about what's being discussed. Now, the other person in this video is a doctor, a chiropractic doctor named Dr. Dina, who's also been eating a lot of fruits and vegetables in his raw state for many, many years. And he's also a friend of mine. I know both of these people for a very long time. But John put this video out recently, and I want to discuss this because there are many people out there that are interested in going on a raw vegan diet or interested in staying on a raw vegan diet. And the reason why I think this video is important for me to put out is in my path of being on raw foods, 29 years or so, it's had its ups and downs. You know, I could say for the last many years, I'm 100% all raw, on an all raw vegan diet. But I could also say that for the first maybe, 12 to 15 years of 100% all raw vegan diet. But then I got to a point where I wanted to experiment, and I started including some cooked foods to see what would happen, to see what changes would take place. I added some raw goat milk, and I added some cooked grains to my diet after being on a 100% raw vegan diet for many, many years. Well over 10 years. And when that happened, I personally started to experiencing some things after a little while that made me realize the raw vegan diet is the way to go. And it has to be, for me, 100% all raw. For me. Now, I want to get into what these fellows are discussing here. But I want to make this clear to everyone out there. The word diet is misleading. Because diet kind of makes it seem, well, I want to do something to lose some weight, but after I lose the weight, I'm going to go back to eating the way I was eating. Or something like that. You want to create a healthy lifestyle. Without putting labels to an extent on yourself, the key is, or the question is, what is your goal? Is your goal to be a label? Or is your goal to have more energy? Need less sleep? Is your goal to lose weight? What is your goal? Without putting a label, figure out what your goal is. And I will help you figure out the best way to accomplish your goal. And from what I've seen, a big part of most people, at least the people I work with, their goal is to either overcome a disease or to avoid a disease. Disease prevention or overcome a disease. Now, there are other types of goals people have within that, and there are other type of people goals out there. But those seem to be the most common ones that the people I work with. And it's certainly my goal not to get disease again, because I was diseased when I was younger with inflammatory bowel disease, also known as ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. As a matter of fact, John here had spinal meningitis, and that's what got him to juicing and got him on a raw food diet. I don't know what got Dr. Dina here into the raw food diet, but I know John's story. And by the way, John has two other amazing channels. He has one called Growing Your Greens, which talks about growing gardens in front lawns and backyards. And he also has an amazing YouTube channel called Discount Juices, which shows all the latest and greatest technology in juicing and also other appliances, and he compares the two. Great channels, so check them out. I'll put the links below. Now, as we get into today's video, they talk a lot about the percent of raw one person is eating. What percent of raw is a person eating? And I don't know even the real way to figure out a percent of what percent you're eating. I mean, if you're eating 4 things a day and one of those is cooked, okay, you're 75% raw if the other 3 are raw. But most people are eating way more than 4 things a day. And then you got to look at how much time you're putting into eating those things. But point being is, technically, if you're not 100% raw vegan, you are just a vegan. You might be a vegan that eats a good amount of fruits and vegetables in your diet, but anytime it's like if you're eating any animal products, you're not a vegan. Now you might eat a lot of fruits and vegetables, but if you're eating any animal products, you're not a vegan. So unless you're 100% vegan, animal free, you're not a vegan. Unless you're 100% raw, you're not a raw foodist. But none of that matters because those are just labels. I'm just clarifying it because in this video they talk about 100% raw and all this. And John recently or a couple of years ago went back to consuming cooked food. Cooked food. What I tell people is the best foods for your body are the foods that are going to be the way they were found in nature and as least processed as possible. So when you go to the store and you get a candy bar or something in a bag, box, container, or can, it's been very processed. The life has been taken out of it. The enzymes are depleted. The nutrients are gone. That is not healthy food. That's the end of the processing cycle when there's nothing left in the food but chemicals and maybe sugar to make the chemicals taste good and dyes to make it look good. But the beginning of the processing begins was once you take it out of its natural state raw and start cooking it. I go the opposite way. I try to make my food live and sprout much of my food. Make it even more raw, live food. But once you cook a food, and I would even suggest possibly dehydrated food, that's where the processing cycle begins. And when that processing cycle begins there, then you're either getting farther and farther away from the natural state or you're going to stay at a certain place. Well, so John he used to say 99.9% raw for many, many years, 25 years or so, 28 years or so, but then recently started eating cooked food or processed food, or as he calls it, his clever little word is heat processed food. You know, people can have their own wording or whatever they mean. Heat processed is cooked. I mean, you could say dehydrated is heat processed, but if you want to consider that cooked or not, and if you do consider that cooked, well, I ate a lot of dehydrated food over the years, so I guess I'm not a raw foodist. But technically, once you heat a food up, so here's the technical side of it. Once you heat a food up over 100 and something degrees, maybe 110 degrees, 115 degrees, once you heat a food over that amount, that's when it's now considered cooked. And the reason being is because that's when the enzymes that are in the food start to disintegrate or deplete or are gone. So the processing and with cooking at that level is when the food becomes depleted. But you can technically cook a food under that level. I guess that would be dehydrated food. And if that's the case, I might have been a raw foodist for about, I don't know, a couple of days. So it depends on how you're looking at this or not. But what are your goals? That was the time I was eating a good amount of dehydrated, heat processed or dehydrated processed foods and realized that wasn't working for me either. So I try to eat. I replaced my dehydrated food with sprouted foods and truly get into a raw vegan diet with fresh juices, fermented foods to have the life in them and the probiotics, the sprouted foods to have the life in them and the enzymes, and making that the majority of my diet, or picking fruit right off the tree. So when we look at the word process, you could say I could pick a mango off the tree, and once you cut into that, you start losing the enzymes. So now you're having a processed food. So I guess the beginning of the process stage is not just cooking. The beginning of the process stage is cutting it or pulling it off a tree. That's when it starts becoming processed. In nature, you would eat it live. It'd still be growing, so a live food. So that being said, there's a conversation between the two of them here. I'm not going to get into the whole video. I will put their channels below. At the beginning of the video, I'm going to skip because they're just for sake of time, but they're talking about a summit, a raw food summit that's coming up. And I'll put the links below to all of that Dr. Dina is hosting and John's a guest on. I mean, considering this, it's quite interesting. I don't know if they call it a raw summit or not, but none of them are all raw. And I don't know the people that are in it are all raw either when you consider some of the things. There are a lot of people that say they're raw now, but then you say, oh, really? That's interesting. How long have you been doing that? And it's like 2 or 3 years or 5 years. But they probably eat dehydrated food. They're probably, on some level, not following all the technical parts of the raw food diet. But regardless, they're giving good information and trying to get the information out there. I just found it, I don't know if the word amusing or interesting is quite the best way to describe this, but as I'm hearing this conversation, and I've done this in the past, but I come to the realization, I was listening to them, raw food is raw food, and heat processed or cooked food is not raw food. So if you're eating any of that, you're not like a 95% raw foodist. No, you're a vegan. Plain and simple. Some people use the word high raw. No, you're a cooked food eater. You know, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want to do. I believe you're going to achieve the best and the most by eating raw foods. Now, from a psychological or from a social standpoint, you might want to add cooked food. If you're living in up north, you might want to add cooked food. There's certainly reasons to have cooked foods in your diet. You know, for my particular condition of inflammatory bowel disease, I found 100% works for me and keeps me feeling the best. The best. So I'm going to promote what I see as the best, especially if somebody's suffering from a disease. They need that much more help. So there's other aspects of health. Exercising, getting enough sleep is extremely important. So there's other aspects of health, the emotional and spiritual side of things. But we're going to hear what they have to say here. And if you want to see the summit, I'll put the link below to the summit. But I might skip and forward because it's quite a long video. But let's see what they have to say. And if you're on a journey of eating better, if you want to say, well, this percent I eat raw, this percent I don't eat raw, post it below. I'd be interested to know, my subscribers, of how many of you are eating a certain way or not and what your experiences were. But let's share here what they have to say here now.
I want to say that, you know, for the longest time, I was like 99.9% raw for most of my raw foods career, and I'd always see Rick eating heat processed food.
90% raw and I still would say maybe I'm up to like 92% now over the 37 years. But yeah, I was the one eating cooked food.
And I'd always razz him so much about it. And now I'm the one that eats more cooked food than him.
Now, on one hand, it's quite amusing and interesting that they're having such a fun time or laughing about now they're eating cooked food when both of these, especially John, was hardcore against cooked food for many, many years, talking about the negative sides of cooked food, and now he's eating cooked food. I've been there. I've been there. As a matter of fact, John came out and interviewed me when I went back to cooked food. And he was in shock. He was like, I got to make a video about this because this is big news. Because there's not too many people out there eating 100% raw food diet. And I to be honest, if somebody's eating 99.9% raw, I would consider them 100% raw food. Raw food is. There's so many little people out there doing that. But, you know, and John says when he used to eat 99% raw, it was like if something got in that was cooked without him knowing. It wasn't like he went out to go eat some cooked food. I don't know the exact situation with Dr. Dina here, but it's on one hand it's fun and I'm happy that they're not putting labels. They are saying labels, but on the other hand, it's a little sad to me to see them smile about eating less better than what they were eating before. Now, when you see this full video, they'll question that and say, well, is it really better to eat all raw? And like I said, I believe anytime you eat cooked or heat processed food, you're going in the opposite direction. Yes, there might be new tastes that are involved and new flavors. From my experience of seeing the way people do it, and I pray this doesn't happen to either one of them, but I see people that have been doing 100% raw vegan, or at least attempting to, eventually start adding some cooked food back to their diet. And again, if that's where you're at, that's not a bad thing, but it's not as good as all raw in my opinion. And then they start getting into raw animal products. At least that's the transition that I had made after 12 or 15 years raw. And then they start getting to animal foods. And then before you know it, people are like on a carnivore diet, eating cooked animal foods. So I pray this doesn't happen to either one of them, but that's just the transgression I see. And there are other videos out there by people saying, well, because raw vegan doesn't work, you can't do raw vegan, you need animal products, you need all this. No, you don't. No, you don't. First of all, a vegan diet definitely works best. There are people out there for many years on a vegan diet that are thriving, and you might say there are people that eat meat that are thriving as well. So be it. There are many other aspects that determine our health other than just we're eating. However, the vegan diet, or at least the raw vegan diet, is going to have the least amount of processed things in it. And it doesn't have to be healthy. There could be a junk food raw vegan diet that some people might be doing. So you got to look at all of the aspects of health before you judge or determine this. But again, as I said, the goal is, what is your goal? Throw out the labels. What's your goal? You know, I tell people, and my best advice to people is, when it comes to diet, when it comes to eating, or whatever you want to call it, is do what's working for you. If somebody comes to me and they're eating McDonald's and they say, oh, I feel great and I don't need any reason to change, I'm just like, okay, do what works for you. From my experience, most people eating McDonald's don't feel great. Most people eating meat, some of them might look good because of the artificial things they're doing with their fake up and all that other stuff. Some of them might feel good for a while because of the stimulation they might get from it. However, from my experience, in the long run, it doesn't work. It contributes to disease. However, if you say it's working for you, do what works for you. To my friend John and my friend Dr. Dina here, if adding cooked food back in your diet is working for you and you feel good about where you're at, so be it. But for those of you that want to be on a 100% raw vegan diet, those of you that want to overcome disease, those of you that want to stay healthy and avoid disease, I recommend, at least for a certain time, you want to call it a cleanse or whatever, or a lifestyle, but getting rid of all the processed food in your diet, and that includes cooked food. I recommend adding more sprouts to your diet, and more sprouted foods, and more microgreens. I recommend adding fermented food to your diet, and I definitely recommend juicing, and I recommend fasting. I recommend not eating late at night. I don't care how many 100% raw food you eat. If you're eating late at night, you're eating a bunch of dehydrated foods, you might call yourself a raw foodist from a label standpoint, but that's not healthy. So that's been my experience. Let's hear a little what they have to say, but it's disheartening to me to see them smiling about eating raw food or going back to to eating cooked food and going back to cooked food here. But that's where they're at, and this is where I'm at. But I love them both. I consider them both friends. And I am not and never going to exclude people from my life because they eat cooked food or because they eat meat. I say most of my friends eat animals. All of my friends pretty much eat cooked food for the most part. And it doesn't affect my relationship with them at all. At all. And I believe people make a mistake when they start excluding people in a life based on how they're eating or how they're not eating. You know, I like to have healthy-minded people in my life and surround myself with healthy-minded people. For me, that's more important than the label of somebody wants to call what they're eating. Somebody could sit right next to me and eat animals. Somebody could sit right next to me and eat cooked food. You know, if they're healthy-minded, we're going to have healthy discussions and it'll be fine. But when people are toxic from a physical standpoint and from a emotional or relationship standpoint, those are people I'd rather not be around. So let's hear a little bit more what they have to say.
4 years and 3 months here about where I've been really close.
More raw than me.
Yeah, no,
these
and
days.
there are some exceptions. I mean, I don't call every company that we get sun-dried tomatoes from to make sure, you know, mangoes go through a hot water bath. Not all of them, but most of them. Occasionally I'll lick the spoon when we make our little guy, you know, some soup that includes some steamed zucchini and kale. So I'm way closer to 100% raw than 99% raw, but just let's give the disclaimer here. Let's be fully accurate. Accuracy is important.
And I'm 80 to 90% raw depending on the day. Some days I could be 100%. You know?
So there we have it. Full disclosure.
Could be.
You see, it's quite interesting. Full disclosure, I'm this raw, that raw. You know, I guess for the video's sake, it's important to mention that. Like I said, if you're eating 100% raw foods and you know you have a half a teaspoon of your baby's soup as you're making it to taste it or something, I don't get so technical. Oh, well, now you're not a raw foodist or anything like that. But if you're sitting down to eat the whole soup, that's another story. As for John saying he's 80 to 90% raw and he says he eats heat processed foods, you're a vegan, brother. You're a vegan. You know, raw food is no longer in your title. It's no longer in your bio or you're not a raw foodist. You're a vegan, and vegan is, praise y'all. I don't like consuming animals or anything to do with animals. I think the vegan diet is the way to go. I think it's more practical because most people don't have the social situation or capability to go 100% raw. But 100% vegan is very easy to do in today's world. It's very practical. There's a healthy way to do a vegan and an unhealthy way to do a vegan. So I'm not knocking the vegan diet, but let's be true here. The raw food shouldn't be in your bio. To John, he's a vegan, and that's fine. But let's call it what it is. As for Dr. Dina, I would consider him a raw foodist based on what he said. Somebody eating, what do you want to call it, high raw, 99.9% raw, whatever it is. You know, he's not intentionally, currently from what I understand, he's not intentionally going out eating cooked food. But then again, he said later he did, because in this video they talk about eating beans and cooking beans. So I guess he's a vegan as well and not raw. I guess I know a good amount of raw foodists that are 5 or 10 years doing it. They have a good view channels on YouTube. I make some videos on some of this stuff sometime. My friend Dr. Fred Bishy, over 60 years raw in his 90s. And I have a book called The Raw Life, where I interview people who've been eating raw for a long time. And the book came out in 2000. That was people that are already doing raw for 20 years. So now maybe 40 years. Dr. Doug Graham is one of the people, all raw. And, you know, so there are people there that are doing it. There are still people that are doing it. So let's hear a little bit more of the video.
All the cards on the table.
All right, Dr. Rick, so what led you to go back to eating all raw? Is cooked food really that bad? You just want to eat all raw or what?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, first of all, being 90% raw on the average, that's, you know, all the cards on the table. You know, a day raw, a week raw, a couple of months raw, throughout that 90% raw time would not be unusual. You know, so but sometimes I, you know, steam some vegetables or some potatoes or whatnot. So what are we? So at the beginning of 2020, like I start out a lot of years, I started out with a juice fast. And I think I did 7 or 14 days, and I was just wanting to keep everything really clean afterwards. I've seen some people go out and juice fast, water fast, do different cleanse programs, and then they binge after I'd done some of that in the you know, long ago in the past and some of my early years, so I just wanted to keep things super clean for a while. And, you know, I noticed it got to be like summer. I'm like, okay, I'm still being super clean here. You know, the juicing really got me on the right track. Then fall came around. I'm like, might as well just finish up the year. But I'm looking forward to steaming some vegetables in January. 2021, I did a similar thing, juice fast, and basically I've been doing that. Except this year, I didn't juice fast at the beginning of the year. I'll probably do it in the spring. So it's just been kind of going that way. And sometimes it's interesting, in the fall, it starts getting a little colder, although it doesn't get that cold here in Northern California, and I think, okay, I'm going to steam some vegetables in January, and now that I've been raw a few years, I'm thinking, I wonder how I'm going to feel, what's going to be different. But then I started thinking last year, let me just go 5 years, round it off to 5 years. So I got about 10 months to go now. And so anyway, that's what led to it. But I do notice, I feel extra good, extra clear when I look at some webinars that we've done. So for 9 years now, we have a summit in the spring, and then we make some webinars over the summer to give potential students who might want to join our Mastering Raw Food Nutrition plant-based curriculum. In the fall, we do some webinars over the summer, and I've usually got we have a thumbnail webcam view of us up top. And looking at some of those in previous years, before 2020, versus say when I look in the mirror now, I'm like, I actually look more clear and more young. I feel really good. So I'm just keeping going. So that's the story. That's how it turned out.
All right, so I have a couple questions for you.
Yeah.
So, of course.
Now, before we get into John's questions, I want to say that me personally, knowing both of these people, they're both vibrant, they have great energy, they're both healthy. So they are doing what's working for them. And Dr. Dina was bringing up cleansing and juicing. And that's what it's about. It's about not even eating more, but eating less and letting your body do the job it's supposed to do. And feeling is not the only thing that's supposed to determine if what we're doing is working for us. You want to look at your sleep habits. You want to look at your overall blood work and everything. But it's very interesting the things he was saying. And one thing I found out over the years, and Dr. Fred Bishy told me about this, was it's better to be consistent being less raw than to go back and forth. So I'd rather see somebody at the eating mostly raw on a consistent basis than doing 1 month raw, all 100% raw, and 1 month with cooked food, and 1 month here and 1 month there. It's better to be consistent, and more likely you're going to be consistent if you do have a little cooked food in your diet. So keep that in mind. You don't need a label of a raw foodist to be healthy, but you need to have a good amount of raw foods in your diet to be healthy. Keep that in mind. I did a video recently. I spoke about the things you definitely want to make sure you're getting on a regular basis. Fresh vegetable juices. You want to make sure you're getting fermented products like kimchi or sauerkraut for the probiotics. You want to make sure you're getting the live foods like sprouts and the microgreens. From a diet standpoint, these are important. And when you do eat fruit, you want to make sure that it's if you can, it's picked ripe and under the best circumstances, or that would be growing it yourself if possible. Or at least knowing the farmer. So these things are the essentials. Anyone can get away with eating cooked food. When I see what people eat out there, some people say, I find it amazing that somebody can switch to an all-raw diet and get better from things like cancer. And I say the body is so amazing, I find it amazing that somebody could eat McDonald's as long as they eat it and not get cancer. The body's really amazing. And you have to work very hard to get sick. That's something people don't understand. You have to work to get sick. If you do nothing and you just eat unprocessed foods, and take care of the other aspects of health, you're going to be fine. It's when you start getting out of the processed foods and the processed lifestyle, get into that's where disease often sets in. So let's hear what John's response is to Dr. Dina here.
Of course, we all get to choose how we want to eat based on what is important to us. So, Rick feels the greatest when and feels he looks the greatest when he's eating all raw, right? I will say that, hey, I get a little bit more sleepy when I eat heat processed foods. But for me, that's a good thing, because now instead of being up like all night amped up and not being able to sleep, I might cook food at night, boom, I'm out cold.
I definitely don't agree with that one. I think, yes, raw foods gives you more energy, or it helps you not get as tired. And I think that's amazing. I agree with that. What I disagree with is that it's good to eat cooked food so you can go to sleep. No, when you eat processed food on any level, it requires more work to digest the food. The more you're working, the more sleep and rest you need, recovery time. So, of course, somebody who's been eating a mostly raw or all raw diet for all these years is going to switch back to cooked food. They're going to be more tired. And that's what I experienced after 12 to 15 years of 100% raw food diet and introducing cooked grains back into my diet. I was more tired. I required more sleep. My mind wasn't as sharp as it was. Just didn't feel overall. I felt okay, but I just felt better on all raw, and I do feel better on all raw.
Well, sleeping, getting the rest I need, which I'm happy with actually. Right. But you could eat for sleep, better sleep. You could eat for looking better. You could eat for how you feel. You could eat for how it makes your stomach feel, how it makes your body feel. You could eat for your blood markers. You could eat for your microbiome, you know. And so these days I try to, take all those into consideration and then eat how I want to eat for my future health outcome.
And, just going back to and who knows, maybe next year, January or February will come along and I'll think, I'm going year number 6 all raw. I don't think so though. But it's going to be really interesting. And I'm going to, discover this myself. It's going to be really interesting to see how I feel, what changes. I mean, is it going to allow me to eat more vegetables? Because I'm going to steam some stuff again, and will I feel better? Will I like it more? Or maybe it will, maybe it won't. Maybe I won't feel as good. Maybe I'll just go back to being all raw. But the thing is, I don't have any particular dogma or guru who's telling me it has to be this way. I am going to let my personal experience, as well as there's a lot of knowledge behind that as well, but for the most part, I'm going to let my personal experience help me decide what mix I want to be. And that's not only how much raw and how much cooked, but fruits versus vegetables, smoothies, juices, or just not doing those things and having the whole food. And John preaches this, Dr. Karen and I teach this, that, it's important to teach people the principles.
Yeah. And
then we don't give anyone a cookie cutter model of exactly how it has to be. And
That's right there is some excellent advice. Use your body as your own experiment, your own personal experience. You can learn from others, but use your body ultimately to decide where you want to be at or what you want to ultimately be doing. That's great advice. And, just don't lock yourself in a box or a label. And like I said, I live in the tropics. I grow my own fruit. I have no desire to eat cooked food. If any of those things changed, I might change my plan of action. If I move to Alaska in the middle of the winter, eating watermelon from my yard might not be the best option. I'm not saying I would start eating whale blood, but I might start eating cooked food. I don't know. So determine what you want to do for where you're at now and where you want to stay in the future. If I'm happy where I'm at in every area, I want to stay in the tropics eating watermelon. I don't have a reason to change. Like I said, do what's working for you. If you don't have a reason to change, don't change. But if you're trying to get a certain result and you want to change the result you're getting, you have to change something to do that. So keep those things in mind. For those of you that aren't eating a good diet, eat better. For those of you that are eating processed food, start cutting out the processed food. And start to understand the differences. It's not only what we're eating, it's also when we're eating. I wrote a book called The Daylight Diet. Not eating late at night is extremely important and helpful in the overall picture. Extremely important. Also, the amount of food we eat. I find many people eat too much. We don't need a lot of food when we're eating good food and living a healthy lifestyle.
And what that does, I think that's so important because not every cookie cutter model fits every person perfectly. And sometimes if your friend is a low-fat raw vegan or follows this guru or does that, and they're putting a round peg in a round hole and it's a perfect fit, That's awesome, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily a perfect fit for you or everyone else in the world. Then you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and it might not work. And if it doesn't work, you know what people usually do? They say, oh, I'm going to tune into John, or I'm going to take this class and maybe I'll add some steamed vegetables, or maybe I need a little more fat, or maybe a little less fat, maybe I needed to add some fruit.
Or maybe less fruit.
He's making a lot of sense what he's saying, and I'll put a link below to his upcoming summit. I am not currently going to be one of the speakers at the summit. I have spoken in the past at some of them, but I'll put the link below. They have decent information. And what I like about Dr. Dina is he is a doctor, so he has doctor's abilities in terms of getting blood work done and understanding the body on a more scientific level, and the organs and reading the blood work. So I like that about him and his wife as well. I definitely think he's a good resource to have here. So let's go over and see. So they talk a lot about in this video about thinking for yourself and just let's fast forward a little here and see this part here. It says, is cooked food the reason for your illness? Let's go there.
Some people out there that basically will say cooked food is the reason for your illness, the reason for why you're sick. You know, is this true or not, coming from a raw vegan doctor?
All right, well, first of all, cooked versus raw is one consideration with your food. Ripe versus stale. Or overripe,
or underripe.
Is it how hard is it to digest? I mean, there's many considerations there. So to lump all cooked food together, to put donuts and McDonald's French fries or any fast food French fries next to some steamed Brussels sprouts is absurd. It's absolutely absurd to just lump all cooked food together. So
that's right. I wouldn't label something cooked food as much as I would label it as how processed is it. Get the extremely processed stuff out of your diet. Yes, those steamed Brussels sprouts are processed because they're cooked, but they're nowhere near in the same category as donuts and McDonald's. So when you make your food choices, ask yourself, how processed is this food? How far away from nature is this food? Steamed Brussels sprouts is not that bad. It tastes actually great, but from what I remember from many years ago, but it's that's another problem with addicted food. I mean, with cooked food, it is kind of addictive. It is kind of addictive, and it kind of changes things around a little, because when you're eating all raw, it gives you a true reaction. Like when I eat all raw, when I'm full or getting near full, I'm done. I don't need more. Cooked food, and I see this a lot with bread and grain products, but cooked food, I see people eating and eating and eating, and they're full. They've been eating for a long time. They eat a lot but they just can't stop eating. They can't stop eating, and I think one of the reasons for that is when you cook a food, you're processing it and lessening the nutrients. Not 100%. I think people are misunderstood to believe you lost all the nutrients out of cooked food. As a matter of fact, some cooked foods have more nutrients that are released in certain places, and even cases like other cases when you might have a disease like inflammatory bowel disease, what I have, cooked food will soften up the fibers, and it might be better for the intestinal colon wall in that time of pain or situation of inflammation. However, I do find cooked food to be addictive. I find it harder to stop. I find it easier to overeat. So beyond the aspects of the nutritional part of it and the disease part of it, overeating does add up to the disease. So I definitely think if somebody's eating raw broccoli versus steamed Brussels sprouts, it'd be a lot easier to overeat on the Brussels sprouts because it's just more addictive, so to say. And I don't know if addicting is the right word or best word, but it's more challenging to stop or to make wise decisions when it's time to stop eating.
I love eating mostly fruits and vegetables, a few nuts and seeds. I would also consider lightly steamed vegetables in the super nutritious, awesome food category. In fact, here's kind of the bottom line. We're talking about individual experiences. I'll give you all a challenge out there. Do this particular mix of all raw for a week. Spend a lot of time mixing dates and coconuts and coconut oil and add lots of chocolate.
But make sure it says raw in the package.
Oh, no, it has to be raw. And just eat that only for a week. See how you feel. See how your experience in life is. And then pick a week, maybe where you go back to whatever you ate the week before, kind of have a washout period. And then pick a week where you eat mostly fruits and vegetables, maybe a few nuts and seeds and some dressings or something if you want, and add 100 calories worth of steamed vegetables a day. And see how you feel at the end of that week. So I'm picking like an extreme, really healthy diet that includes some cooked food versus an extreme, really unhealthy diet that's raw. And I think it's hard to imagine any of you are going to feel better with that raw diet compared to the cooked one. So it's an extreme example to show you can't just make extreme statements and have them apply universally.
Right, and the other thing is, how is the food cooked? So, Dr. Rick, you've been 90% raw overall, for 37 years now.
Yeah.
And so how did you heat process your food? Because I talk about that openly on my channel. I only use an Instant Pot to heat process things.
Yeah,
I don't cook any other way.
Of the 10% of...
Well, yes, now we're getting to a good subject here, because when you use the word cook, there's different ways to cook. So some people, technically, if you heat up your food over certain degrees, now it's cooked, 115, 118 degrees. But steaming or the Instapot versus frying and microwaving, big difference. So they're getting into a good point here. It's not just cooking your food. It's also how are you cooking your food or how are you processing your food. That makes a difference also. Definitely steaming is not as bad as microwaving or frying. So no human being should be eating fried foods and microwave foods. It is absolutely not healthy. But when you go to most fast food restaurants, when you go to most houses, the microwave or the frying are the main two ways people cook their food. And it's not healthy or what I would recommend. So they're going to talk about that.
Cooked food over the years. Oh boy, it depends. At the beginning it was different than, say, the last 10 years or so. But let's say in the last 10 years, probably 90% of that cooked food was just steamed. Because it's the cleanest, it's the healthiest.
Yep.
You preserve the most nutrients, you don't damage the food.
If you consider dehydrating cooking, well, that would be better than steaming. And if you consider dehydrating cooking, well, then you would have to consider freeze-drying cooking, which technically I don't consider freeze-drying and dehydrating cooking. I would consider it processing, but not cooking. But they're both better options than, in my opinion, than steaming, based on your situation. Like I said, if you need to soften the fibers for issues, for issues where you need softer fiber, that's another story. But good information here, and yes, steaming is, like I said, much better than microwaving.
And it, makes it a little softer and whatnot. So, there's a giant difference between steaming and frying. For example, deep frying or even baking. You lose more nutrients, you form some carcinogenic substances. So, exactly, another good reason not to lump all cooked food together.
Yeah, success leaves clues. I would do steaming or Instant Pot. One of the healthiest ways to heat process your food, for sure. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. With Instant Pot, some may say it has special properties. It's basically a pressure cooker.
Yeah, pressure cooker.
So you heat the food up 20 degrees-ish more than the boiling point of water, 212/100. But, and all else being equal, the higher the temperature, the more nutrients you lose. But that higher temperature also
All right, for the sake of the video, I'm going to fast forward this. I'm not interested in eating cooked foods. If you want to see the video, I'll put the link below of best and worst ways to cook your food. That's another video for another time. These are two people that are, I guess, rejoicing in their eating some cooked food and they want to know what's the least harmful way to do it. I'm not interested in that. And if you're watching this channel, probably you're not either. But if you want to see it, I'll put the link below. They talk about beans. I eat beans. I sprout beans. They talk a little about eating sprouted beans versus cooking beans. Cooked beans are hard to digest. So they get into that topic. Let's see here. Grains. They talk about grains and sprouting grains, raw versus cooked grains. Grains are very addicting. Grains could be a problem, but let's see what they have to say about grains.
Grains, Dr. Rick.
Yeah, grains. There's many types of grains you can sprout.
Yeah, I know.
That way.
By the way, going back to the beans, sprouted beans are one of my staples in this diet. I eat sprouted mung beans, sprouted lentils. I sprout them. I love them, and I love them, and they're wonderful. Grains, I don't. So beans, most people cook. I sprout. Grains are something I personally don't consume at all, even sprouted. I mean, I guess I wouldn't consider microgreens sprouted grains, but if you are going to eat grains, sprouted is the best way to do it. Let's hear.
If you want, you can sprout quinoa. You can sprout wheat, rye, various things. Dr. Karen knows more about that than I do. That's more her specialty in our class. But I mean, I prefer things raw and sprouted overcooked, but I'm not going to tell anyone they're wrong for eating some cooked quinoa or making some brown rice. It just depends how you feel. It depends what you want to do.
Yeah, I think that these are very important foods for us to, once again, Dr. Rick, we want to kind of get to the summary of this.
So, getting to the summary here, this next part, Dr. Rick, John, myself are all in agreement with this next point here, that eating ultra-processed food is definitely not the way to go.
This episode, we're both going to agree on this cooked food is completely toxic, completely bad. We should never eat it. Is ultra-processed cooked food. We both agree with that. Things in packages, bottles, and jars have been ultra-processed, made in a factory, added sugar, flour, salt, and oil.
Yeah, I mean, if it comes in a package and it's a relatively whole food and you haven't done much to it, that might be okay. Just the package alone doesn't. But yes, when you've refined foods, you've taken away the fiber, the water, the nutrients, and it's just empty calories. None of those things sound good. That's what 99% of most people eat.
Yeah, fast food.
Yeah, so that stuff's just not so good.
And that is the cooked food that actually, is bad, but there could be, as we discussed in this whole episode, there is healthier heat processed foods. Once again, to sum it up, steam it or pressure cook it. And number two, you want to focus on things like vegetables, especially leafy green vegetables, other vegetables, maybe some starchy vegetables, maybe some beans, some grains, and some mushrooms.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can still get such tremendous value out of steamed vegetables. They're still a good source of omega-3s, whereas if you heat them up at higher temperatures, the omega-3s can tend to degrade, but steaming doesn't. They're still going to help produce nitric oxide in your body and help your blood vessels and lower your blood pressure and get more blood flow everywhere in your body. They're still going to provide tons of minerals, tons of phytonutrients, tons of...
So while these people are promoting eating cooked foods and so on, what I've noticed is, and what I say all the time is when people actually eat cooked food, there are certain raw foods that aren't as good as cooked foods. For example, and we're going to see what they discuss in this next point. There's a whole bunch of raw food junk foods out there, just like there are vegan junk foods. Well, there's raw food junk foods out there as well that are not healthy. And there are raw food junk foods that are out there that are not healthy. The raw food candy bars, dehydrated food you got to be careful with. Raw food desserts, they might be good tasting, delicious, but they're not necessarily the best thing for you to do. As a matter of fact, they're not healthy. Actually, they're not healthy at all. A raw dessert might be better than a cooked dessert. If you can figure out how to make a raw donut, that might be better than or not as bad. I won't say better, I'll say not as bad as as a cooked processed donut, but it's still a donut. But when it comes to raw candy or raw junk food versus like steamed vegetables or soup in the wintertime, cooked food has my vote. I'd much rather see somebody eating a cooked food meal in the middle of winter than a raw food candy bar to maintain that label of 100% raw foodist. So that's something I've always said. When you do a raw food diet, you got to get serious and do it the right way. It's okay to have a snack every now and then, but not every day and not overdoing it. For me, probably at this point, and I've done it different in the years, but for me at this point, my biggest snack on a raw vegan diet is make some banana ice cream. But I take things very seriously, and I also don't want to feel less energy. I don't want to need more sleep, and I don't want to go backwards in my walk. So for me, I keep it very serious, but if you don't suffer or haven't suffered from a disease like I have, it might not be as important for you to go 100% raw vegan. Like I said, experiment, see how it's going, try it before denying it, and then figure out what works best for you and do what works best for you. All right, so let's hear what they have to say about steamed vegetables versus raw food desserts.
Eggs and sugar and that kind of thing, and you can make one that tastes just as good or better out of dates and chocolate or carob powder and some walnuts and some other things. That's way better, but I would say steamed vegetables are several orders of magnitude better yet. But if those chocolate things keep you on the path and make you not give up and become a carnivore or go ketogenic or something like that, then it's served you well. But don't make a whole meal of it. Have it for dessert after your steamed vegetables and your salad.
And hopefully not every night either.
No, hopefully not every night. Or like the person making it on day one of it's actually Chef AJ, I got her list here of our summit. She makes a super good point. She's like, look, if you're raw or you're whole food plant-based, not most of your friends and family are.
Yeah.
So if you can invite them over and talk about the things you have in common, and you can make them a chocolate cake out of dates and walnuts.
And they love it.
And they love it, and everyone enjoys, and maybe they'll even have a few of your steamed vegetables or whatever. You're enhancing the quality of your life, because the socialization and the connection is another important. So here's kind of one thing. Raw versus cooked is one issue in nutrition. Nutrition is one issue in your overall health. Don't stay home alone every night being frustrated and lonely, but all raw. So anyway, the social part can come in there as well. But
now these are excellent points, especially for people getting into this and people wanting to do this. But on the other side of the coin, here's two friends of mine that were 100% raw food for quite a while. And they're going backwards, not forward, in terms of the processing of their food. And we all have our reasons. I don't say this in a negative way. I'm just saying what they're talking about here with all the cooked and the raw is good for somebody to determine where they want to be at. They've discussed, try what you're doing, see what's working. You don't have to be 100% raw to be healthy. But if you are going to be 100% raw, make sure you do it the right way. All great advice. These are two people that were thriving on 100% raw, I believe, from my understanding of where they both were. And for their own personal reasons, they have decided to cut back and go back. And I could relate, because at one point in my life, I decided to do that. I was thriving at raw. I was curious to know what would happen if I went back to some cooked food. I was curious to know what would happen if I started adding raw goat milk to my diet and raw eggs. Curiosity got the best of me. And I realized after a while, I didn't feel as good. And I went back to raw. And sometimes people have to do that. It's my hope that both of them not go back all the way to more cooked and then go back to animal products, even raw animal products. Like I said, it's the pattern I see happen sometimes. And I hope this doesn't happen to them. But either way, they're still my friends. And they're doing what's working for them now and what they found out. They're both very knowledgeable on this topic. I recommend the summit that's coming up. I recommend, and I'll put that information below. And yeah, they got good information, good videos. I don't want people to think you can't do all raw. Like I said, I do it and I thrive it and I love it. And I already tried going back. I'm not going back anytime in the near future. I don't foresee that happening. But take the labels away. You don't have to be a raw foodist to be healthy. And it doesn't mean cooked food is poison. But consider when you're putting something in your body, how processed it is. How long it took from get to the tree or the ground to your body. How many people are involved in touching that or denaturing that or processing that before you put it in your body. And that food you're going to consume. When I go to the supermarket for myself, my family, it's a little bit different. But when I go for myself, I pretty much stick to the produce area. That's it. And even then, a lot of things in the produce area are not good or not healthy based on, I'm growing food, so I know what good food looks like. So it's a lot of stuff's picked unripe. It's just not the ideal. So as we continue on this path, we start to learn these things. Somebody said, well, how do you know if you're truly eating organic? Well, I know after doing this long what an organic apple looks like versus a not organic apple. But when you're first starting out, you might not know. And there might be a little trust level of, okay, I got to trust whoever's in charge of the organic standards and the store that I go to that it is organic, or the farmer's market or so on. And then there's some issues like, it's a lot of money to get certified organic. So if I go to a farmer's market and the farmer says, well, we're not officially organic, but we don't spray. Sometimes you got to take their word for it. Or you can go to the farm and stay with them and figure that out. But sometimes you got to take their word for it. So just these are things to consider. There's more to it than health. They're only focusing on a cooked versus raw in this video. But there's so many other aspects of health that I like to focus on my channel. And both of they do as well on their information. But from a health standpoint, I'm just giving you the information that's out there about what's happening. But when I think about raw foods, when I think about fruits and vegetables, that puts a smile on my face. I don't have a smile on my face when I talk about going back to cooked food. And that's what a lot of this video is. I'm glad to be on this video with both of them here, or to comment on this video. And in closing, again, I'll put the summit information below. If you want to see this whole video, what they're talking about, I'll put the link below to that. Are enzymes important? They're getting talking about that, and all of that information. So, and there's so many people on the summit. So very cool information. Thank you, Dr. Dina, and thank you, John Kohler. Good work, guys. And, I hope to see you both soon. And everybody, put your comments below. Let me know what you think about this topic. Are you all raw, doing it and feeling amazing and absolutely not thinking about going back? Are you questioning the decision if you should go all raw or not? Or have you been raw for a while and you're kind of seem to be struggling and you want to go back? Let me know what you think in the comments, or if there's any other videos you want me to talk about on this topic, or any discussions you want on this topic that I could discuss or bring up, or maybe answer your questions. All right. Thank you for watching, everybody. Have a great day and a great raw life.
Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life Health Show.